I came home to a half-empty closet and divorce papers waiting on the kitchen table. No warning, no fight, just her handwriting scrawled across the top. Petition for dissolution. Next to it sat her wedding ring, placed carefully like a final insult. Her voice still rang in my head from that morning. She said, "I'm tired of being broke." Then she handed me the papers, picked up her overnight bag, and walked out the door with her lover. I didn't chase her. I didn't argue. I didn't even speak. I just nodded, signed, and watched 13 years of marriage vanish with the slam of a car door. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 38 years old, an operations manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio. I'm not the kind of man who begs. Not the kind who fights in parking lots or screams at locked doors. My strength has always been in silence, in watching, in preparing. That day, I felt something inside me shut down. Not broken, not defeated, just cold. When she left, she thought she was upgrading her life. His name was Tyler Cross. Wealthy, successful on paper, the kind of man who flashed cash like it was oxygen. She didn't hide it. She wanted the house, the savings, and she wanted his lifestyle. She thought I would crumble. But instead of fighting, I simply moved with precision. I walked to my desk drawer, pulled out a leather-bound notebook, and wrote down 3 words: freeze, track, respond. That was the plan. Not anger, not emotion, strategy. She'd already cleaned out most of our joint account before sliding those papers across the table. But she didn't know about the separate savings account I'd been building quietly for years. She never noticed the investments I'd made in my name alone. She didn't realize I had already started moving certain assets into trusts and protected accounts the moment I felt her slipping away. When she drove off with Tyler, I stood in the kitchen, listening to the silence. It wasn't grief I felt. It was clarity. I saw exactly who she was, stripped of every excuse, every promise, every vow. And I knew that one day, she'd regret underestimating me. The next morning, I went to work as if nothing had happened. No one in the office knew I'd just signed my marriage into the grave. I shook hands, led meetings, and kept my face calm. But in my mind, every detail was being filed and stored like evidence. Her phone records, her credit card charges, every breadcrumb she thought I was too blind to notice. I didn't confront her. I didn't confront him. I let her have her illusion of victory. Because silence is the most dangerous weapon a man can wield. What she didn't understand is that I never raise my voice. I don't beg. I don't threaten. I wait. I prepare. And when the time is right, I finish the fight. 1 year later, the phone rang. Her voice trembled on the other end. "Daniel, can we talk?" I leaned back in my chair, a quiet smile forming. The story she thought had ended was only just beginning. The first weeks after she left were like standing inside a burned-out house. The walls were still there, but the life inside had been stripped away. People kept asking if I was okay. I told them I was fine, and they believed me because I looked calm. But inside, I was taking notes. Every silence, every absence, every detail mattered. I didn't chase after her. I didn't beg her to come back. Instead, I studied. Tyler was older than me, a flashy real estate investor who lived on borrowed money. His reputation wasn't spotless. I found whispers of lawsuits, unpaid contractors, and deals that collapsed at the last minute. He dressed the part, but beneath the suits and cars, there were cracks in the foundation. She thought she'd found security. She'd only walked into a storm. At work, I poured myself into long hours, projects, and clients. But in the quiet moments, I built my own systems. I created folders of documents, bank statements, receipts, emails she'd left behind on our shared laptop. Every piece of information went into my files. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. But because when someone betrays you, the smartest move is to let them believe you're powerless while you gather strength in the shadows. I remember standing in our empty bedroom, looking at the hollow space where her clothes used to hang. I wasn't angry. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt was colder, measured, like a soldier digging trenches before the battle. I thought back to the day she dropped those papers on the table, the way her voice didn't even crack when she said she was tired of being broke. She wanted more than I could give. She thought money would make her happy. But I knew something she didn't. Money can vanish as fast as it comes, and character is the only currency that holds value. I made no dramatic moves. I didn't call her. I didn't call him. I stayed silent. My silence unnerved people more than any words could. Friends asked if I wanted to talk about it. I just shook my head. They thought I was in denial, but the truth was, I was already planning the long game. I quietly changed passwords, updated account security, and placed holds on assets tied to my name. She might have walked away, but she hadn't taken everything. Not even close. She assumed I was standing still, stuck in the ruins she'd left behind. But every day, I was moving forward, brick by brick, building something stronger. There's a power in not reacting, in not giving your enemy the satisfaction of watching you break. I knew she was watching me from a distance, expecting me to collapse. But instead, she saw me steady, composed, carrying on with my life. And in that silence, I was already winning. Because when someone leaves for money, the clock immediately starts ticking. And I was willing to wait as long as it took for that clock to run out. The months that followed were quiet on the surface, but beneath that calm, I was moving with precision. I didn't try to fight her decisions in court. I didn't argue over furniture, cars, or whatever scraps she thought she had won. I signed the papers, handed over what was required, and let her believe she had buried me. What she didn't realize was that silence was not surrender, it was strategy. I had always lived methodically. Budgets, investments, carefully tracked expenses. She used to mock me for being too cautious, too deliberate. But those habits became my armor. While she ran off with Tyler to chase a life of expensive dinners and luxury weekends, I quietly redirected the savings she didn't know existed. I maxed out retirement accounts. I bought shares in companies I knew would climb. I cut unnecessary spending and built cash reserves. Every month that passed, I was building strength in places she couldn't see. Meanwhile, whispers about her new life began to reach me. I never asked, but people talk. Friends mentioned seeing them at restaurants, flashing jewelry, and driving new cars. Someone told me Tyler had taken her to Vegas. Another said he'd bought her a designer bag worth more than our old car. She thought she'd won the lottery. What she didn't realize was that the kind of money Tyler threw around always came with strings, and strings snap when pulled too hard. One evening, I logged into a financial tracking system I'd set up years ago. I noticed she'd missed 2 payments on the credit card that still had her name attached to mine. Not large amounts, but enough to tell me the shine was already wearing off. I froze the account without a word, shifted balances, and ensured nothing tied to me could be used as collateral for her chaos. She wouldn't know it was me. She'd just think the money had slipped through her fingers. I kept my routine simple. Work, gym, home. The rhythm of a man rebuilding his life. But every small move I made, changing legal beneficiaries, updating insurance, sealing off access to assets, was another brick in a wall she would never climb again. It wasn't revenge I was after. Not yet. It was preparation. I understood that desperation reveals people faster than comfort does. She thought she was done with me, that she'd walked into a new life without consequences. But I knew better. I knew people like Tyler. They burn bright, then burn out, leaving wreckage in their wake. Each night, before bed, I opened my notebook. I added new entries. Track. Record. Secure. The words became a ritual, steady as breathing. My silence wasn't weakness, it was pressure. A quiet weight she didn't even realize was pressing against her. And as months passed, that pressure grew. Because money can build illusions, but illusions don't last. And the day those illusions cracked, I'd be ready. By the time 6 months had passed, the cracks in her perfect life were no longer whispers. They were visible fractures. I never asked, but the details reached me anyway. A colleague mentioned seeing Tyler at a bar with a different woman. Another friend casually remarked that my ex looked thinner, more stressed, when she came into the grocery store. I didn't seek these stories, but they arrived, uninvited, like signs the storm I had predicted was finally here. I never reacted. Not once. I didn't send messages, didn't ask questions, didn't even allow my face to change when someone brought her name into conversation. But every detail I learned, I wrote down. Names, dates, patterns. Quiet notes in the same leather-bound book where my strategy lived. The silence was working. People expected me to lash out, to fight, to make scenes. Instead, I gave nothing. That nothing became its own kind of power. Even Tyler, for all his arrogance, must have noticed. Men like him thrive on conflict, on proving themselves superior. But I didn't give him the luxury of a rival. To him, I was invisible. That invisibility was my weapon. One night, I checked public records online. A habit I had built, methodical as always. There it was. Tyler had been named in a civil suit over a failed real estate development. Investors claimed fraud. The amount in dispute was staggering, $500,000. My ex had tied herself to a man whose empire was already crumbling. 2 weeks later, another signal arrived. A letter addressed to both of us, forwarded from the old house. A notice of delinquent property taxes. She had kept the house in the settlement, insisted she wanted it, like some kind of trophy. But now the payments were late. She'd bitten off more than she could chew. I didn't call her. I didn't warn her. Instead, I filed the letter in my folder. Every mistake she made became another piece of the quiet puzzle I was building. At night, I thought about her words the day she left. I'm tired of being broke. She said it like I had failed her, like money was the measure of a man. Yet here she was, drowning in the wealth she chased, realizing too late that it came wrapped in chains. I stayed focused. My accounts grew. My investments doubled with the market upswing. My home, smaller and simpler, was fully paid off within months because I refused to waste money on distractions. The contrast between our lives widened with every silent decision I made. And though I didn't speak to her, I knew she felt it. That silence, that unshakable calm she had once mistaken for weakness. It wasn't weakness, it was a reminder. Because when someone walks out on you for money, they expect to see you crumble. They expect tears, anger, desperation. When they see only silence, only strength, it eats at them. Slowly, relentlessly. Her illusion was breaking, and my silence was the hammer. By the 8th month, the silence between us finally broke, not by my choice, but by hers. A message appeared on my phone late one evening. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well, that she wanted to catch up. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not once in all those months had I reached out, and now she was the one testing the waters. I didn't reply. I simply turned off the phone and went back to my book. The next week, another message came, this time longer. She wrote that things had been complicated, that she missed certain parts of our life together. She said she wanted to talk in person. Again, I stayed silent. My silence wasn't cruelty. It was control. Each unanswered word was a mirror, forcing her to sit with her own decisions. Around that same time, news about Tyler reached me more directly. His company had declared bankruptcy. Creditors were circling. He had been evicted from his office building. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply noted it, as if I had always known this moment would arrive. And in truth, I had. Men who build castles on sand eventually drown in their own foundations. I saw her once, by accident, at the grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her choices had compressed her. She spotted me from across the aisle, froze for a second, and then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded once, kept moving, and left my cart half full just to avoid the trap of conversation. Back home, I wrote in my notebook, she's circling back. Desperate. I didn't need to write more. The signs were clear. Friends began to tell me she was asking about me, quietly, almost nervously. One said she had asked if I was seeing anyone. Another mentioned she'd brought me up at a mutual acquaintance's party, saying she missed the stability I gave her. The irony was sharp. She had traded stability for the illusion of wealth, only to find herself stranded without either. Through it all, I stayed the course. Work, training, investments. My life moved forward, steady and strong. The silence I held wasn't empty. It was full of progress, full of momentum, full of power she could no longer touch. When she sent the third message, it was no longer casual. It was pleading. She wrote that she had made mistakes, that Tyler wasn't who she thought he was, that she felt lost. She asked me directly if I would meet her. I didn't respond, because silence is louder than any rejection. Silence carries weight. It says, I heard you, I understand you, and I choose nothing. And nothing, at the right moment, is more powerful than everything. By the 9th month, her messages had shifted from polite to frantic. At first, she wanted to catch up. Then she admitted she had made mistakes. Now she wrote as if the silence between us was unbearable. She said she needed to see me, that she couldn't believe how cold I had become. But the truth was simple. I hadn't changed at all. I was the same man I had always been. She was just seeing me clearly for the first time. She started calling. The first time, I let it ring. The second time, I silenced it before the first vibration ended. By the third attempt, I didn't even look at the screen. I knew who it was. Her desperation wasn't my emergency. It was her consequence. Then came the letter, handwritten, slipped into my mailbox. The words were shaky, pressed deep into the paper. She wrote that Tyler had left her, that the money was gone, that she didn't know where else to turn. She asked for forgiveness, asked if we could talk, if there was still a chance. I read it once, folded it neatly, and filed it away with the rest of my notes. Evidence. Nothing more. Her panic grew, but my silence remained. People around me noticed. One coworker said I seemed calmer than ever. Another mentioned I looked younger, lighter. They didn't know the truth, but they could sense it. Silence wasn't crushing me. It was sharpening me. Every unanswered call, every ignored message, was discipline in action. She, on the other hand, was unraveling. I heard through a mutual friend that she had been asking for money. She claimed it was temporary, that she was just in a bad spot. Tyler's promises had turned to dust, and now she was clawing at the only foundation she knew, me. But I wasn't her safety net anymore. I was the reminder of what she had thrown away. One night, I sat in my quiet house, lights low, notebook open. I wrote a single line. She chose silence when it was mine. Now I choose silence when it's hers. I closed the book, leaned back, and let the weight of it settle. What she never understood is that silence isn't absence. It's presence without words. It's the quiet that follows a storm, the kind that makes people realize just how much damage has been done. She had filled our marriage with noise, complaints, demands, dissatisfaction. And now, in the void of my silence, she finally heard herself. She wanted me to break that silence, to explain, to argue, to show her there was still some connection between us. But there wasn't. There was only the quiet. And in that quiet, I had already moved far beyond her reach. The panic was hers. The calm was mine. And the longer I stayed silent, the more the balance shifted in my favor. The 10th month brought the inevitable. She stopped hiding behind phones and letters. She showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I had just finished mowing the yard when a car pulled into my driveway. It was hers, though not the polished version she used to drive when she wanted to impress people. The paint was scratched, the bumper dented, the shine long gone. She stepped out, thinner than before, eyes carrying that restless mix of shame and desperation. She said my name like it was an anchor, like speaking it would stop her from sinking. I stood there, calm, wiping my hands on a towel, not moving closer, not stepping back. She talked fast, words tumbling out about how Tyler had ruined her, how everything she thought she wanted had turned to dust. She said she made a mistake, that she missed the life we had, the stability I gave her, the way I never failed her. I listened. That was all. No nods, no interruptions, no sympathy, just silence. My silence made her fill the air with more words, trying to break through a wall she couldn't climb. She said she was sorry. She said she wanted another chance. She said money wasn't everything, that she saw that now. I let her talk until her voice cracked, until the rehearsed lines gave way to raw panic. Then I simply looked at her, calm and steady, and turned to put the towel back in the garage. She followed me a few steps, her words rising in urgency, but I didn't answer. My silence was louder than any speech could have been. Eventually, she stopped. The quiet stretched between us until it became unbearable for her. She asked if I had anything to say. I didn't. She waited, but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator inside the garage and the faint rustle of leaves in the yard. Finally, she muttered that she would leave, that she just wanted me to think about it. As she walked back to her car, I stood still. No anger, no gloating, just a steady calm that told her everything she needed to know. She wanted a reaction, any reaction, because a reaction would mean there was still a thread between us. But there wasn't. I had cut it the moment I signed those papers and chose silence instead of begging. When the car finally disappeared down the street, I closed the garage door and wrote in my notebook, "She's drowning." Silence holds the weight. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, the quiet kind that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove anything. She had gambled her life on money and lost. I had bet mine on silence and discipline, and now the outcome was clear. The difference was undeniable. She was restless. I was steady. She was desperate. I was free. And that imbalance was only growing with time. By the 11th month, she returned a second time. This time, she didn't come to my house. She waited outside my office building. I saw her before she saw me, leaning against her car, arms crossed, rehearsing her lines in her head. I could tell by the way her lips moved, the way her hands fidgeted. She was preparing to perform. When she noticed me, she straightened, forced a smile, and tried to look confident. But confidence doesn't hide the weight of desperation. She walked toward me quickly, blocking my path before I could reach the entrance. She started talking again, about us, about how things used to be, about how she finally understood what mattered. She said she wanted to make things right. She said she still loved me. I kept my eyes steady, my face unreadable. Silence. Always silence. She filled the air with more words, growing louder as if volume could replace substance. She said Tyler had been arrested for fraud, that she had debts she couldn't pay, that she was afraid of losing everything. She said I was the only person she could trust. It was all noise, all excuses, all too late. The people around us glanced curiously as they passed, but I gave them nothing to see. No scene, no drama, just a quiet man holding his ground. She realized it too. The more I refused to speak, the more frantic she became. She asked if I hated her, if I wanted to punish her, if this was revenge. Still, I said nothing. Finally, I moved past her and walked inside. The glass doors closed behind me, and she stood there on the sidewalk, frozen. Her reflection stared back at her in the building's facade, and for the first time, I think she saw what I had seen all along, the emptiness behind her words. Later that night, another letter appeared in my mailbox. This one was longer than the last, written in a shaky script that nearly tore the paper. She begged me to meet her one last time. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything but us. She wrote that she knew I was the better man, that she should have never left, that money had blinded her. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my folder, and closed it without another thought. The final act was already playing itself out. She was collapsing under the weight of her own choices. My silence wasn't revenge, it was her reflection. She had demanded noise, demanded more, demanded everything I wasn't willing to give. And now, all she wanted was the steady, quiet life she had once despised. But the truth was simple. That life no longer existed. Not for her. Not with me. And when the end came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I would close the door with the same silence I had carried since the beginning. The 12th month marked the end. She showed up again, but this time it wasn't at my house or my office. It was at a quiet cafe I visited every Friday morning before work. She must have followed me there. When I stepped inside, she was already seated at a corner table, waiting, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup she hadn't touched. I could have walked out. I could have turned and left her staring at the door, trapped in her own desperation. But something in me knew this was the final scene, the last act in a story that had dragged on long enough. So I walked over, sat down across from her, and folded my hands on the table. Still silent. She began the way she always did, with apologies, with regret, with words that sounded rehearsed but cracked around the edges. She said she had lost everything. Tyler, the house, the money. She said she was alone, scared, and ashamed. She said she finally realized I was the one constant, the one who had always been steady. She wanted to start over, rebuild, go back to the way things were. I listened without a word, my face calm, my eyes steady. She mistook my silence for a chance, pressed harder, her voice trembling as she leaned forward. She said she loved me, that she had always loved me, that she had been blind. When she finally stopped, waiting for me to break the silence, I spoke for the first time in a year. For words, steady and cold, that life is gone. Her face collapsed. She whispered that I couldn't mean it, that after everything, I owed her a chance. But I had already stood up. I placed a few dollars on the table for my coffee and turned to leave. She reached out, her hand brushing mine, but I didn't stop. Outside, the morning was clear, the air sharp with the bite of winter. I walked slowly, breathing steady, each step a reminder that silence had carried me this far, and silence would end it clean. Behind me, through the cafe window, I saw her still sitting there, staring at nothing, her cup untouched. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was closure. A cold, quiet finality that required no anger, no shouting, no explanation. For 13 years, she had filled my life with noise. Demands, complaints, restless words. For 12 months after she left, I answered all of it with silence. And now, in the end, silence had spoken louder than any scream could. She wanted me back. She wanted the stability she had once despised. But the truth was simple. Stability can't be returned like a borrowed item. Once it's shattered, it's gone. And I had no intention of rebuilding it with her. After that day in the cafe, I never saw her again. She tried once more. Another letter slipped into my mailbox, pages filled with apologies and promises. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said, and none of it mattered anymore. I placed the envelope in the same folder as the others, then closed it for good. The story was finished. My life moved forward quietly, but with strength. I paid off the last of my mortgage and owned my home free and clear. My investments continued to grow, steady and patient, just like me. At work, I earned a promotion, not because I asked for it, but because people trusted me to handle responsibility without noise or drama. My days became predictable, but in that predictability, I found freedom. Some evenings, I would sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the houses. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt clean. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't tracking, recording, or securing. I had already won. Not against her, not against Tyler, not against anyone else. I had won against the version of myself that could have broken, could have begged, could have chased. Word reached me eventually. Tyler was serving time for fraud. She had filed for bankruptcy, moved back to a small apartment in another town. The life she thought she wanted had turned to ashes. People expected me to feel vindicated, maybe even satisfied. But what I felt was simpler: distance. She was no longer part of my story. She was just a chapter one had closed without raising my voice. That was the true victory. Not revenge. Not proving her wrong. Just refusing to play the game she thought I would play. She had chosen noise. I had chosen silence. And silence had outlasted everything. Sometimes, I think back to the moment she slid those divorce papers across the table, her voice steady as she said she was tired of being broke. At the time, it sounded like an ending. Now I understand it was the beginning of her downfall, of my rise, of the life I built in the quiet. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence is power. It's patience, discipline, clarity. It's the weapon no one sees until it's too late. And when the storm finally passed, when her noise faded into nothing, I was still standing. Quiet, steady, unmoved. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just had to let the silence speak for me. And it said everything. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.